we seek the Lord. And the whole series is tailored around developing a deeper relationship with the Lord, or going deeper into our relationship with the Lord. And so last week, Pastor D spoke on when. The type of circumstances, the type of life occurrences that ignite us to go and seek out the Lord. And today, we're going to talk about why. Why do we seek the Lord? And I've asked a couple of you the question, and the typical answer is, well, I'm seeking the Lord so that he can give me blank. I'm seeking the Lord so that I can have more peace, more wisdom, more joy, be a person of character, more humility. Those are all fruits of the Spirit. Those are all great things. However, those are all byproducts of seeking the Lord. What is the main reason, or one of the main reasons, that we seek him? And we'll talk about that today. So we'll be studying Ecclesiastes 2. Ecclesiastes 2, and we'll start in chapter 1. And for context, the person speaking here is the son of David, King Solomon, who outside of Jesus Christ, we're told is the wisest man to ever walk the earth. And so in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 1, he starts with this: I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Solomon says, I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. So for context, King Solomon is on this journey. He's on this quest to find what is the meaning of life. Why are we here? How can a man know his purpose, and what shall a man do on this side of eternity with the few days, with the short time that he has? And so prior to this in chapter 1, Solomon thinks, okay, if I stimulate my mind enough, if I grow in wisdom enough, if I become this resource that anyone can come to about any situation, maybe that will bring me fulfillment. But in the end, verse 18 of chapter 1, he says, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. And so he goes down the intellectual route and he says, no, this is only bringing me more sorrow. The more I grow in wisdom, the more grief that I have. So he's still longing for something. So the intellectual route didn't work, and so that's why in chapter 2, he starts with, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. So the intellectual route didn't work out. What if we go towards sensuality? What if instead of feeding my mind, what if I feed my flesh, my ego? Verse 4, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and in harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Something before we start digging in that I want us to notice is that in verse 3, Solomon says, I tried cheering who? Myself. In verse 4, he says, I built houses for who? Myself. In verse 8, he says, I amassed silver and gold for who? Myself. On his path, on this journey to find fulfillment, to find what is the meaning of life, how can a man become content, satisfied? He went down the road of self-indulgence. If I live for me, if life is predicated upon this one question, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of it? How does this benefit me? How can I live in a way that I get everything that I want? And Solomon, being King Solomon, he had the resources for it. We might not be able to go down the real estate route like he did, so we might be thinking, man, if I only had property. Solomon went there. I pray we don't go down the relationship route that he went down. Because in 1 Kings, it tells us 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now I kind of see why he was in depression. He spared no expense. He had the resources, and he self-indulged. His heart had its fill. And he says it in verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. That's not saying I participated in. I took a little piece of. Solomon is saying I gave myself over to. I immersed myself. He wanted to make sure, I don't know if this happened to y'all, I'm going to put myself out there, but there's been times in school where I had a quiz, studied for 30 minutes, and I got a D. And all I could think about is, if I studied for 2 days, 3 days, would the outcome been different? Solomon does not want to get to the end of the road and have to think about that. Maybe if I did this, maybe if I went this way, maybe if I indulged in this, I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. And some of us have been there where we've said, if I could just get that, if I could just have that type of marriage, that type of family, that type of house, that type of car, if I could just get that, I know I'll be satisfied. If I could just get that, I know I'll be content. Listen to the man who did get that, who did get it all. Verse 11, he says, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve. What did he toil to achieve? For great projects, built houses, planted vineyards, gardens, parks, planted all kinds of fruit trees, bought male, female servants, owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem, amassed more silver and gold for myself, treasures of kings, provinces, acquired men and women singers, a harem, the delights of the heart of man, became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. That is what he toiled to achieve. And this is the man that says this. When I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. He says, I acquired much, but gained nothing. I increased, but I still lacked. I had everything, but I still felt empty. And so Solomon, in the KJV, he comes to this conclusion. I'm going to say it the way the King James says it. He says, vanity of vanity. It is all vanity. So then, Lord, what shall a man do on this side of eternity? What shall we give our time to? What shall we seek? You ever been hungry, or more so, someone came to you saying that they're hungry, and you asked, what do you want to eat? And their response is, I don't know. And you ask, what are you in the mood for? And their response is, I don't know. Do you want Chinese? Do you want fast food? You just start throwing out options, right? For our soul, it's something like that. Where the body knows it's craving food, just doesn't know what it's craving. Doesn't know if it's Chinese, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, whatever have you. So our soul is craving something. Our soul is yearning, beckoning, calling out for something. And the difference between the believer and the unbeliever is this: we can put a label to what it is. The difference between the Christian and the non-Christian is just that we can put a label to it. But our soul craves just as theirs does. It's a little different, though, because we're craving from a place of we've tasted and seen what is good, so we want more. That's the great paradox of God. The more that we get of him, the more that we desire. So it's this ever-chasing, going after, but it's not like the world's, because with the world's ever-chasing, with the world's going after, you keep coming up short. And just like Solomon, you keep trying to fill that void. and you fall into a place of depression, of hurt, of frustration, because everything you put in there isn't working. And your soul still yearns. It still cries for something more, something real. So why do we seek him? We seek him because instinctively our soul knows it is in need. Our soul knows that something is wrong, something is missing, and I need this. I may not know what it is, but I know something is there and I need it, because everything I've been putting in here, everything I've tried to fill the void with is not working, so there must be something more. There has to be something more. For then, if there is nothing more, then what then is the meaning of life? If there is nothing to satisfy this craving in my soul, this yearning, what then is the meaning of life? And that's exactly what Solomon asked. Let's jump down to verse 17. He says, "So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune." And it is a great misfortune indeed, because that's exactly what happened to Solomon. His son Rehoboam came after him, sat on the throne, made the wrong decisions, and thus the civil war between the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel began. And he tore apart his father's legacy. He tore apart all that his father worked for and sweated for, bled for, just like that. And then eventually, enemy nations invaded and destroyed the temple of Solomon. Verse 22, "What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? All his days his work is pain and grief. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. A man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment?" Hold on. A man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Many of the things that Solomon went for, in and of themselves, they're not bad. It's not bad to desire a good marriage, a good relationship. It's not bad to desire better for yourself. When those things become the main things, however, when those things become the things that we use to fill the void, then we run into the situation where diverse eternity is in the heart of man comes from Solomon. And we're trying to fill eternity with a temporal aspect, with something temporal. And we run into the place of discontentment, unsatisfaction, frustration, to the point where, as Solomon said in verse 17, we might even get to the point where we hate life. But he says, for without him being God, who can eat or find enjoyment? And the reason I bring up the fact that these things aren't bad in and of themselves is because some of these things are things that God desires for us. It's just that, and I won't go too deep into the existential crisis that Solomon is facing right here. However, when you take God out the equation, life no longer has meaning. If you remove God from reality, which you can't because without God there is no reality, but humor me, if you remove God from reality, life no longer has meaning. That's why later on in the New Testament, Paul says, if the resurrection didn't happen, let us eat, drink, for tomorrow we die. There is no goal here. You build it, it's great, awesome, now what? Someone after you could come tear it down, and what good was it? So when you separate these things from God himself, then that's where we fall into the trap, where we're chasing and we're seeking something to fill eternity. And as we've all heard, that God-sized hole in our heart can only be filled by God himself. So my challenge today to the believer and the non-believer. To the believer, it might be a little different. It will be different to the believer because, again, we're coming from a place of we already have this foundation, this established relationship. So I know some of us might be asking, well, what would be the point of going deeper? I'm already good where I'm at. To go deeper, I might have to sacrifice something. I might lose something. God, I'm content. I'm content because of you. Why would I want to go further? Our soul will continue to yearn. On this side of eternity, our soul will always yearn for him until we get to the next side. So whatever purpose, whatever pieces of your identity, whatever pieces of your life that he has not yet revealed, if you stop now, if you go no further, you leave all of that on the table. And you might say, I'm good with that. Again, I'm good where I'm at, Lord. Your soul will continue to yearn. You will be miserable because we seek him, because instinctively our soul knows. So to the believer, I challenge you to go deeper. Though it may require sacrifice, though you might lose things, though you might lose some of your peace, the superficial peace, like things aren't good right now, God. Why are you telling me to pray for faith? Because when you tell me to pray for faith, you're going to send me something that's going to require faith. So things aren't good right now, but I keep hearing pray for faith. I challenge you to go deeper. Because he knows that fulfillment and satisfaction that your soul craves is in him. And as he pulls you deeper, he's satisfying your soul. And for the unbeliever, for those who have not yet accepted Christ as their Lord and Savior, I challenge you to think about it. We have too many examples, in my opinion, Christians and non-Christians alike, that can tell you, if you go down that road of trying to fill the void with anything but God, I promise you, you will come to the same conclusion as Solomon, vanity of vanity, it is all vanity. Some of you know that I am not the biggest NFL fan, not because I don't like the sport, because I'm just not familiar with it. But I listened to the testimony of this man called Deion Sanders. I'm sure many of you know him, Mr. Primetime, as I understand that he's called. Now, again, I'm not the biggest, football fanatic, so I don't know how big a Super Bowl ring is, but I heard it's a pretty big thing to an NFL player. And Mr. Primetime has not one, but 2 championships, and maybe more. Correct me if I'm wrong. In the prime of his career, in the peak of his life, Mr. Primetime drove his car off a cliff looking to kill himself because the void would not be silenced. The void would not be quieted. He has the resources, the money, the fame, the recognition. Thousands, millions know his name, and yet the void craves more. And to silence it, he would rather just silence himself. So he drove his car off a cliff. And they even say that it's a miracle he survived because it was a 30 to 40-foot drop. And many of you know the testimony. He crawled out the wreckage, got on his knees, and cried out to the Lord. Because he tried everything and nothing worked. We have too many examples like that. We have King Solomon, who had it all, but said he had nothing. But concluded that without him, God, who can eat or find enjoyment? With the Lord, we can find that satisfaction that our soul craves. With the Lord, the void is quieted, where I don't have to keep stuffing. And let me tell you from my experience, because some of us have been down that road. I tried drugs. The high, it was great while it lasted. And then I got brought back right back down. And you have to go back for another one, and another one, and another one. Until you find yourself, unfortunately for me, I don't know if you guys know this, but a drug habit is a very expensive habit. I talk to my customers who like to golf, and I tell them, yeah, that's kind of like doing drugs. It's a very expensive habit. I couldn't tell you where my money was going if you asked me, but if you looked at my life, you would see where. So I found myself at the Chase Bank on Palm Beach Lakes with my credit card in my hand, shaking, wondering, should I take out this cash advance, get hit with all this interest, just so I could get money to go and buy this? Or should I go back to Christ? Because I hear him calling me. I've been smoking for a long time, and that void was never quieted. But when I turned around to him, gone, stilled. Now, you have to the left and right people who can tell you, you go down that road, vanity of vanity. It is all vanity. You go down the road of Christ. I was sharing with a couple of you that got baptized yesterday while I was watching the movie. I sat and I stared at the screen wondering, how am I here? How am I watching a movie about Calvary Chapel, at Calvary Chapel, with my wife to my right, my kids? How? When at one point, I was at that Chase Bank, trembling, wondering what to do. Because everything I tried didn't work. But the Lord did. And so, for the unbeliever, my challenge to you is, don't get to that point. And if you are at that point, know that God is calling you. Come. Come. I'll close with this before Pastor Sean comes up. These two things very briefly. I once heard someone say, it's like we're drinking from broken cisterns. And if you don't speak KJV, a broken cistern is essentially a cup with a hole in it. They said, it's like we're drinking from broken cisterns, trying to quench our thirst. And you might get a drop or two. You pull from that well with a broken cistern, you pull from that well, the cup has a hole in it, a drop or two might still linger, and you might, that's not enough to quench your thirst. While God is calling you, come all who are thirsty. I have rivers of living water. Where when you pull from this well, you have to pull no longer. It will satisfy your soul. And I'll end with this. Another quote that I heard, some say it was a Confederate soldier, some say it was one of the biblical heroes. Regardless, the gentleman said, I asked to be given all things so that I might enjoy life. I was giving life so that I might enjoy all things. I asked to be given all things so that I might actually enjoy life, that I might find contentment and satisfaction, but instead, God gave me life. And through that context, through God, I was able to enjoy all things. Praise be to God.